The night was colder than usual, and exhaustion weighed heavily on my shoulders as I pulled into the driveway. It had been a grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital, running from one emergency to another, dealing with critical patients, and barely having a moment to breathe. But none of that compared to the shock waiting for me at home. I stepped out of my car, eager to take a long shower and crawl into bed, but the moment I reached for the front door, something felt off. My key wouldn't turn. I tried again, frowning as I jiggled it. The lock was different. My heart pounded. I turned to the security camera just above the doorbell, its tiny red light blinking menacingly. And then, as if on cue, her voice cut through the silence, sharp, mocking, and filled with triumph. "Your husband doesn't want you here anymore, Patricia," my mother-in-law sneered through the intercom. "I have changed the lock. Go find somewhere else to live." I froze, gripping my bag tightly as the reality of her words sank in. She locked me out. Of my own house. But instead of reacting with rage, I simply smiled. A slow, knowing smile. "Okay, Patricia," I replied calmly, my voice steady. She had no idea. No idea that she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because this house wasn't my husband's. It was mine. I took a deep breath, suppressing the laughter bubbling in my chest. This was almost too good. I had spent years enduring Patricia's hostility, her snide remarks, her passive-aggressive digs, her never-ending attempts to make me feel unwelcome in my own marriage. But this was a new low. I stepped back, tilting my head up to the security camera. "Patricia, are you sure you want to do this?" My voice was light, almost playful. "Oh, I've never been more sure of anything," she cackled. "You're out, sweetheart. My son is done with you. Move on." A slow smirk spread across my lips. She had no idea what was coming. "All right," I said, turning on my heel. "Have a good night, Patricia." With that, I strolled back to my car, leaving her to think she had won. But victory was a fragile thing, especially when it was built on lies that I didn't go far. Just around the block, where I parked my car in an unlit spot and pulled out my phone. One call. That's all it took. "Mr. Lancaster, good evening. I need the locks changed at my house immediately. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The voice on the other end was sharp and professional. "Understood, Dr. Bennett. I'll have my team ready." I leaned back in my seat, the cold night air creeping through the cracked window. Patricia thought she had the upper hand. She thought she had finally gotten rid of me. Too bad she didn't know the deed to the house had been in my name long before I even married her son. Patricia had made a fatal miscalculation. And I was about to make her regret it. 15 minutes later, I pulled back into my driveway. A black van was already waiting, its headlights dimmed. Mr. Lancaster, my locksmith, stepped out, giving me a knowing nod. "This won't take long," he assured me. While his team got to work, I crossed my arms and stared at the front door. Inside, I could hear Patricia laughing, probably celebrating her little victory. I imagined her sipping wine on my couch, gloating over her so-called triumph. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The locks were changed in under 10 minutes. With a fresh set of keys in my hand, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The moment I stepped inside, Patricia turned, her face twisting in shock. What, how did you," she stammered. I closed the door behind me with a soft click, locking eyes with her. "Patricia," I said sweetly, tossing my keys onto the counter, "it seems you've made yourself quite comfortable in my home." Her eyes widened. "Why your home?" "That's right," I said, strolling toward her. "Did you really think you could lock me out of a house that I own?" Her mouth opened and closed, her brain struggling to catch up. But my son, he told me." I laughed. "Oh, Patricia. Your son has no legal claim to this house. I bought it before we were married. The deed is in my name. Which means. I gestured around us, you're the trespasser here. She went pale. You wouldn't dare throw me out. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Watch me. Then, I pulled out my phone and dialed. Hello, officer. Yes, I'd like to report an intruder in my home. Patricia's face drained of color as she scrambled to her feet. Wait. No. I raised a hand, silencing her. You tried to kick me out of my own house, Patricia. Now, it's your turn. Patricia's face crumbled as she stared at me, her body rigid with shock. I could see the panic setting in, the way her fingers twitched, how her chest rose and fell in uneven breaths. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. Wait, she blurted out, her voice losing its usual arrogance. We don't have to do this. Let's talk. I tilted my head, pretending to consider her plea. Talk. I repeated, feigning confusion. Oh, you mean like how you talked to me through the security camera while I stood outside after a 12-hour shift? She flinched. Or do you mean how you changed the locks without a single phone call, assuming you had the right to throw me out of my own house? Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. Look, I didn't know. Didn't know. I scoffed. Patricia, you've hated me since the day I married your son. And now you've gone too far. What exactly was your plan? To humiliate me? Make me homeless? Force me to beg your son to take me back? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I sighed dramatically, shaking my head. You really thought you won, didn't you? I let out a humorless laugh. You were so desperate to get rid of me that you never stopped to think. You didn't ask yourself the most basic question. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice to a whisper, who actually owns this house? Her breath hitched. It's mine, Patricia. Every inch of it. The walls, the floors, the very foundation you're standing on. I could see it now, the wheels turning in her head, the weight of her mistake pressing down on her. She looked around the living room, suddenly realizing that the power she thought she had was slipping through her fingers. But my son, he told me he bought this house after you two got married. I let out a slow, pitying chuckle. Oh, Patricia. Do you really think your son, who can barely manage his own finances, could afford this place? Her lip trembled. He lied to you, I continued mercilessly. Just like he's been lying to me for years. And you, being so desperate to see me gone, never even questioned it. She wavered on her feet, gripping the armrest of the couch for support. So now what? She asked weakly. I gave her a slow, deliberate smile. Now, you pack your things and leave. You have 5 minutes. Her eyes widened in horror. Why, you can't be serious. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen, the 911 call still waiting to be connected. Try me. Her whole body sagged. For the first time in her life, Patricia was powerless. And she knew it. Patricia stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. I could see the war raging inside her, pride battling fear, arrogance crumbling under the weight of her mistake. Why, you're really going to throw me out? She stammered, eyes darting between me and the front door. That's exactly what's happening, I said coldly, folding my arms. You had no problem locking me out, Patricia. So why should I hesitate to do the same to you? Her hands clenched into fists. I am your husband's mother. I deserve respect. I let out a sharp laugh. Respect? You mean like the respect you showed me tonight? I stepped forward, closing the gap between us. You humiliated me. After a grueling 12-hour shift, I came home to find myself locked out like a stranger. And now you think you can demand respect? Her face turned red, her nostrils flaring. Fine, she spat. But my son will hear about this. He will. Oh, don't worry, I cut in, smirking. He's going to hear everything. And when he does, I hope he realizes just how much damage you've done. She swallowed hard, shifting uncomfortably. Now, you have two choices, I continued, stepping back. You can leave quietly, or I can call the police and let them remove you. Her face twisted in pure rage. You wouldn't dare. I pressed a button on my phone. The dial tone rang through the living room. Patricia's eyes widened in alarm. All right. All right, she yelled, throwing up her hands. I'm leaving. A slow smirk curled on my lips. Good choice. She stomped toward the staircase, muttering curses under her breath as she disappeared to gather her things. I leaned against the kitchen counter, listening as she banged drawers and zipped suitcases in a fury. A few minutes later, she returned, dragging a small suitcase behind her. Happy now? She snapped. Ecstatic, I said sweetly, strolling to the door and pulling it open. She stormed past me, stepping onto the porch. Just as she reached the last step, she spun around. You will regret this. Her voice trembled with fury. I arched an eyebrow. No, Patricia. The only person with regrets here is you. Then, without another word, I shut the door in her face. A stunned silence followed. I peeked through the security camera feed, watching as she stood motionless on the porch, her rage giving way to something else, defeat. She had lost. And she knew it. With a victorious sigh, I tossed my keys onto the counter and stretched, letting the exhaustion of the day settle in. Patricia had played her game. And tonight, she learned the hard way, she was never in control.